Well, good morning, everyone. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I have to say that yesterday I did a presentation that for the Patronato and the board, explaining the evolution of farming through the need of water and the scarcity of water. Today, what Mercedes asked me to also give you a quick overview of the evolution of farming in terms of technologies and going from extensive agriculture to intensive agriculture, and talking about sustainability. For the people who were yesterday, you will see that there's a few slides, 3 or 4, that will be in common because they are important themes that we have to discuss. So for the ones who've seen that, sorry for that, but I think it's important for everyone. Okay, so let's start talking about what is the main challenges that we have in modern agriculture. So we were talking today about climate change. They were talking that 20% of the Spanish surface is now becoming desertic, right? And that is something that we are seeing all over the world. So that means that we need to react and we need to be more conscious about the use of water and also eventually bring in different crops to those areas, right? We have, limited resources. We were talking about the soil and the loss of biodiversity. And you were talking about food waste. I believe it was Juan or that mentioned that there is like 10%. In the US, we were talking yesterday, at least 16%. And I don't know what were you talking about, but the food waste, there are many different places, but just on the fields, 16% of the produce is left on the fields, not being harvested. So I don't know if you were even including that, but it is tremendous.
The food waste is 30 to 40% total. What I referred to is 10% of greenhouse gas emissions are linked to food waste.
I believe so. So that's something that we really need to be conscious. And we are thinking about creating new foods. And by the way, I've spent a significant part of my life and my career working on alternative proteins and alternative way of farming. But I think we should focus first on making a better use of what we currently have, right? And have less waste. So, what happened? We went from extensive agriculture, and I'm going to try to give you through a quick journey on the last 100 years on the evolution of farming. But the reality is that in the last 20, especially the last 10 years, the evolution is being much faster with the incorporation of artificial intelligence and big data. I think we are going to see amazing changes, right? So basically, we started with extensive farming. What was that? I mean, farmers were just planting some seeds. Basically, they were doing what we were doing 1,000 years ago, probably in slightly bigger areas, and probably with a little bit more knowledge about fertility, but basically very little use of fertilizers, very little use of pesticides, really inefficient use of water. Mainly was done by flooding, and it was basically significant areas of land, but are not necessarily very productive. On the other hand, because they didn't have fertilizers, the only way to be able to continue getting productivity was by rotation of crops, which is something that when you talk about soil, it was an amazing good practice that eventually we should be incorporating again, and we will talk about that, right? Then it came what is called the Green Revolution, right? This is when we started the chemical companies, the fertilizers companies, they started bringing higher doses of nitrogen and different products as fertilizers, and they started, pest control using pesticides and other technologies. And obviously, this is when we started to use tractors and other machines. I mean, to be honest, and I'm 48, I remember when I was very young, 15, I still knew some people in the north of Spain that they were just using the horses in order to work their fields. So basically, they were doing the same thing they were doing 3,000 years ago. So it has been in the last 20 years when we've seen a significant evolution on the Earth, right? So this is when it comes the intensive farming, which has plus and cons, and everybody has been talking about that. This is when we suddenly started to produce much more, using much less. Productivity was the name of the game, and this is what it's been so far. And I have to say that we're going to talk about sustainable agriculture, but I don't have the answer. I mean, it's really nice to talk about sustainability, and I don't remember who mentioned this before, but when I think it was Pedro maybe, that when you talk about the cost of water, you talk about 10 cents per cubic meter. I don't know who was talking, but when you start using desalination, you start using other technologies that can go up to $1. In this particular case, we are going to be facing a challenge like how can we become sustainable without losing at least not much of that productivity? And there's not an easy answer to that, right? And then, of course, because of some of the challenges, we have the genetically modified products. And I have to say something which is very interesting. A lot of people talk about non-GMO things. And I've been most of my career all over the world selling non-GMO products, right? Because customers want that. But if you ask me, is GMO bad? The answer is nobody has proven anything wrong on that. And when you talk about sustainable crops, actually that might be an important part of this because they are species which are more resistant to drought, they are more resistant to some pests. So once again, if we really want to tackle the challenge of feeding 10 billion people, we will have to accept certain things and remove some paradigms from our everyday conversations in order to be efficient and truly become sustainable and be able to feed those many people. And then in the last, I would say it says the last part of the previous century, but in the last 25 years is when all the main advances have become. If you go to, and yesterday I was talking about that, Israel has been an unbelievable R&D country, if I may, especially on using water. All the advanced irrigation systems that are used all over the world, a big part of them were developed in the Middle East. And we need to be thankful for that because for people that are not aware, when you are just flooding a field, first of all, you lose most of the water that will not get to the plant, but then you have a significant amount of evaporation. So it's very inefficient. And when you're able to just drip the water into the plant, it's going to be, first of all, more efficient for the plant, but also it's going to be more efficient for the use of water. And in addition to that, it allows you to deploy fertilizers and eventually, fungicides or any other thing through the same system, right? So anyways, we were talking before about precision agriculture and vertical farming. Yesterday, someone was asking me, what is the solution for feeding 10 billion people? And the answer is not one. I think it's going to be a combination of many of those solutions and many of these technologies, what is going to take us to where we need to be, right? So this is some of the technologies that we were talking about. The GPS, I thought it was fascinating. Josep, I think there's an amazing opportunity to do partnerships with chemical companies, or as we were talking before. I think this is going to be super helpful in order to do things with less resources, less fuel, less fertilizers, less pesticides, and we need to go towards that direction, right? And then we have aeroponics and hydroponics. Aeroponics, yesterday we were talking briefly about that. This is one of the slides. Everybody probably knows what hydroponics are. Basically, you have the plant, instead of using soil, you have the roots there, and the roots are just in water. I mean, you can have savings up to 90% of the use of water if you do it precisely. The challenge you have is the cost of capex and infrastructure needed, and eventually energy in order to keep that is really high. The aeroponics is a little bit taking that a little bit farther. You don't even have water there. You just create a mist and it's like being in a sauna, and you are just deploying both the irrigation as well as the food and the fertilizers in that mist, right? So that's very important. Sustainable farming. Everybody talks about sustainable farming, and it's funny, but I believe 80% of the people I've asked, they don't know what sustainable farming is, or at least they miss something that I consider extremely important, which is the social aspect of farming. Yesterday, and I don't have this slide here, but I have a map of the world with all the main areas where farming, fertile land is, and you have Brazil, you have the United States, you have the Russian steppe, you have Europe, you have certain areas in Africa, actually the Nile in the center of Africa, and then you have in Asia, India, and Pakistan and Indonesia. So you have all those areas. The challenge is with the climate change and the scarcity of water, countries like Brazil, the United States, are going to become the suppliers of food for the world. And there's going to be even more social inequality. So when we talk about sustainable agriculture, and I will give you an example afterwards that I've been dedicating the last 7 years of my life as an example, it's important to, yes, use using resources in a better way. What we are going to see later is actually using resources that otherwise would not be utilized, like salt water, the sun, even CO2, right? But also trying to bring that agriculture to places where they were not even able to think about farming. What I call is democratizing farming. So sustainability goes beyond technology. In my opinion, it has a very strong social component, okay? So we were talking about the sustainable farming, and I smile when I put this because these are basically the hippie communes many times, right? They were just decided to be self-sufficient. They were just staying there. It was a lot of biodiversity, both on plants and the people in the farms. So it was a very interesting model. Pros, beautiful, great, super high quality products, very low pesticides. They were basically talking to each plant. The challenge of that is that it was very ineffective in terms of productivity, right? But it was the first approach to sustainability. It was including farming as part of their lives, and I think it's great, right? Then this was a big one, in my opinion, the certification. I'm a big fan of standardization, and before you were asking about some of the challenges for innovation, and there was a big word there, which is regulatory. I mean, regulatory, in my opinion, is a mess, because each country, not even each continent, each country has their own regulatory. So you can, if you are a startup or if you are starting innovating something, you need to work on a regulatory approach in the United States, but then you want to come to Europe and you need to start in the UK, and then you have to go to Spain, and then to France, and then to Italy, and each of that is between $500,000 and $700,000, and probably 1 or 2 years, and actually the requirements sometimes are similar and sometimes are completely different. So in sustainable farming, they started talking about organic, for example, right? And they started bringing those concepts. I remember when the organic or the bio boom happened in Europe. I was running a frozen food company here in Spain. Virtu is a family-owned that we grew extremely fast, an amazing company and an amazing entrepreneur who's been my mentor and a friend and now a partner. So it was very important standardizing, because that helps people to invest because they know what to expect, right? And then, of course, we started not just treating with pesticides massively, but being more precise when we use it. And second, starting using alternative crops. The first time I saw this was in Peru, and they were using insects to treat certain pests, and it was extremely effective and efficient. It was, for me, it was an eye-opening, right? But it is the pest control is one of the main challenges that we are going to have, and you were talking about that, Pedro, with the mathematical models. This is what really makes things difficult. I will talk about algae. Many people are trying to grow algae in different places, and the main challenge they have is the pest control. There are a lot of things that want to eat that algae, and there are no pesticides to do that, so you have to do it with natural ways, and that is what it is creating a challenge. And then on the 2010s, we started talking about the soil again. We started talking about biodiversity. We started talking about inserting certain crops and surrounding them with other crops, which was very, in my opinion, very smart, and it opened again the rotation of crops, and it was bringing better products. And now here we are talking about a completely different thing. We are using data in order to have better crops. Instead of using pesticides massively, we start treating not even one part of a field, because we have sensors and we understand where to treat. This is a good anecdote. I guess most of you like wine. And when you go to a vineyard, I don't know if you've seen that, and this is something that has been done for the last couple of 100 years. If you go to, how many of you have seen a vineyard that has roses in one side of a vineyard, right? And you say, I mean, it's so cute, how nice these people, right? Well, that was the first, it's a technology, it's a sensor to detect pests. A rose is an extremely sensitive plant, and if there's a pest, that pest will attack the rose before attacking the vineyards. So it was a sensor that the farmers, through decades, or not to say centuries, have been using in order to detect pests. Now we have much more technology, and it allows us to see. A good example was what Pedro was telling us before, right? We have the circular agriculture. Urban agriculture, to me, is not really a solution in terms of food, because I don't think, probably the resources we are going to be using to produce that food are going to be significantly higher than the outcome that we are going to have from it. But that is a good thing about the social component, and bringing those ecosystems into the cities. I think that's something very interesting, and we'll talk later if you want, but there's companies who are creating softwares in order to connect very small farmers that they have maybe a farm like this, and make those products commercial, because if not, they were not able to sell, right? So we were talking about sensors, we were talking about data-driven and smart farming. Why is all this important? And this is slide, I used it yesterday, but many of you probably don't know what is this. The virtual water, it's a concept that is critical for all of us. When countries in the Middle East, and I was just giving an example of Israel or the UAE, where I've been talking several times, invited by the government, about food security. Those countries, when they buy wheat or they buy rice, they are not buying wheat or rice, they are buying water. Because if they had the water, they would be able to produce it themselves. And this is something that we need to have very clear. And I said that before. We talk about Brazil and North America. Water is going to be the most important asset, actually it is today, that we are going to be dealing with in the coming 50 years. And there was the dichotomy of the water and the diamonds in order to talk about the difference between price and value. You talk about the price of a diamond, and then you talk about the price of water. And this was done on the 70s, when water was for free. People, when you were talking about bottled water, people were laughing at you, right? But why, you have free water, right? But in those days, they said, well, diamonds are super expensive, water is super cheap, free, right? The question is, how many trucks of diamonds would you be willing to give away for one bottle of water for your daughter in the desert, right? So those things that are very clear are things that many countries in the world are facing. And Spain is one of them. The south of Spain, areas where we were able to grow different crops 50 years ago, today are facing big challenges with that. So keep this concept in mind, because this is going to drive a lot of international agreements in the next 20, 30 years. And this is an example of bringing a crop to a place where it was impossible to grow anything. This is a picture of one of the farms that we've been using for the last 7 years. This is the desert of New Mexico. It's very close to the border with Mexico. As you can see, there's basically nothing. And it is a lot of heat, a lot of sun, salt water in the underground. So most deserts in the world are full of water. The challenge is that that water has high salinity and high minerality, which for a normal crop, it's a problem because those plants die. But when you bring an alternative crop, like it is this algae, it's a microscopic algae called Nanochloropsis. There are 300,000 types of algae, and many of them we don't know about them. But probably about 3,000 types of algae are what we call domesticated. We know what they eat, we know how to grow them, and we know what they produce. But this is an example of democratizing farming, right? If we are able to bring crops that are resistant to temperature and they can survive in high salinity water, brackish water, or even salt water, I think we would be able to bring more food production using resources that otherwise would not be utilized, and bring it to areas where they didn't even think about being able to grow anything. So that is what I call democratizing farming. And this is what happens after you invest some time, and that each of those ponds, it looks small, but each of those ponds is an acre. So this is 100 acres farm. And the beauty of this crop is it grows 12 months a year, and in a normal crop you harvest once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times in alfalfa. With this crop you harvest twice a week. So the growth rate is unbelievable. And now, the challenges of this crop is a new crop. Nobody had been able to grow nano at a scale before us. So there's still a long way. If you think about a crop like corn, I mean, we've been growing corn for the last 7,000 years, and now you have many big multinationals investing in improving varieties, getting more resistant. We are still light years away from that. But this is something that, in my opinion, is going to be one of the solutions. And this is just an example. But bringing crops that can be grown using resources that otherwise would not be utilized is a big part of the solution. And this is something, this is just data, just to give you an idea. We talked about yesterday. The right side on this crop is the yield per acre in terms of essential amino acids. And essential amino acids is basically the proteins are broken, they have essential amino acids, but you cannot compare the number of essential amino acids you find in whey or in a cow or in tofu, right? So the way we did is we broke it down into total essential amino acids. So in an acre of land, you can grow about 20 pounds of essential amino acids per acre per year with peas. You can grow about 70 pounds of essential amino acids per acre per year from cows. You can grow 6,000 pounds per acre per year from Nanochloropsis. So this is really a breakthrough, right? But when we go to the other side, it's even more interesting. In order to produce 1 pound of essential amino acid from peas, you need 9,000 gallons of water, which is about 4 liters per gallon. So this is like 35,000 liters per gallon. You need 17,000 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of essential amino acids from beef. You need 0 fresh water to produce 1 pound of essential amino acids from Nanochloropsis. So this is a good example of alternative crops that can be installed in countries, imagine East Africa. It's not just about producing food, it's about creating jobs and impacting those communities, right? And basically that's it. I want to remind everybody that water is the most precious resource we have in planet Earth. You cannot drink oil, you cannot drink wheat, you cannot drink anything. Thank you very much.